Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX and I'm Megha Sharma. The world's most formidable military alliance began a 3-day meeting in Washington, D.C. today, ostensibly to strengthen partnership on its 75th anniversary and pledge greater support to Ukraine in its war with Russia. The U.S. President Joe Biden has pledged to forcefully defend Ukraine against Russia's invasion at the NATO summit. Biden has said that NATO knows that Putin won't stop in Ukraine, but make no mistake that Ukraine can and will stop Putin, especially with the collective support of the NATO nations. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that the world must not wait for November for the US elections to drive back Russia's offensive against his country. At the same time, there is an important message that has been sent out by NATO to the Indo-Pacific, from which it seeks greater partnerships, bigger cooperations in wake of what it calls is the authoritarian actors and terrorist organizations in the Indo-Pacific region. There is, in the meanwhile, parallelly, a Chinese military joint exercise that has been initiated in Belarus right on the border of Poland, which is set to take place in the next 11 days. And this is the first time in 6 years that China has sent military personnel to Belarus for such exercises. The joint drills are being seen as a response to the increasing presence of NATO forces on Belarus's borders. But it also goes on to signify the increased support that Russia is getting from China, but also other European nations, including Belarus, including Hungary and Slovakia. Let's start our conversation. Joining me on the telecast is Taniguchi Tomohiko, who is the former special advisor to the Japanese former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Thank you, sir, for joining me on the telecast, and your views particularly when this outreach is made by NATO wanting to expand its partnership with Indo-Pacific nations, and particularly when an invitation goes out once again to Japan, to South Korea and to New Zealand.
And to Australia, I believe.
Yes. To Australia as well, yes. Can you hear me, Professor Taniguchi?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, so if you could explain to us what is happening, is there a churn that is taking place within NATO, and is there a possibility of potential inclusion of Indo-Pacific nations, especially when you talk about Japan and the other three nations that I just mentioned?
Before the term Indo-Pacific was born, actually the godfather was Shinzo Abe, the Prime Minister. Before this term became readily available, NATO had already begun reaching out to what they call partner nations, including the nations specified by you, South Korea, Japan, Australia, and New Zealand. So one thing that I have to say is that it's got a long history dating back to the early 2000s. That's number one. Number two, China's growth militarily has given certainly impetus to both parties, NATO and the Indo-Pacific region nations like Japan and Australia. So there has emerged a mutual interest among them to work together more closely with each other.
Okay. Also interesting to note, sir, there are developments that are taking place they happened in South Korea, where there was this joint military exercise that was executed. This was the naval force that was on display with the United States of America, Japan and South Korea. This was taking place in South Korea. Now, how important it is, there are two spheres of war that the United States of America is now focusing on. One is the Ukraine-Russia conflict that goes on for the last 3 years. And the second aspect is, of course, the increased aggression from the Chinese side in territories and nautical territories of Japan, the Senkaku Islands being the focus point, and of course, the sovereignty and integrity of Taiwan, which is at stake.
Tokyo has been consistently saying since the invasion began in Ukraine that what is happening on the European front could happen in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. That concern has driven Japan to do as much as it can to help support Ukrainian effort. Now, if you look at the region where Japan exists, it is not the kind of neighborhood that you could envy. Russia, North Korea, China, all developing nuclear arsenal and vehicles, and none of which has exercised anything akin to democracy. So it is all the more welcome that South Korea, Seoul, is joining forces with maritime powers of Japan and the United States to show commitment and will to North Korea, China, and Russia.
Okay, and how do you view the developments that are coming in, particularly where Russia is becoming closer to China? There is, of course, a number of these drills that are being executed by Russia and North Korea. How does the global stage look like? And then is Russia and China then a threat to the Indo-Pacific region as well?
China and Russia have been threats to the Indo-Pacific region since decades ago. In that sense, there is very little thing which is very new. What's new is that Russian economy has weakened dramatically if compared especially to China. Russia's economy is probably as 1/10 of Chinese economy. So the master, if you like, of the game in the Indo-Pacific theater is neither Russia nor North Korea. It remains China. And China's growth necessitates that like-minded countries, naval powers, like the United States, Australia, Japan, and possibly New Zealand, should join forces to counterbalance the Chinese ambition, which is growing almost daily.
Right. But do you concur with the opinion that United States of America, because of its aggressive policies in supporting Ukraine, has pushed Russia further into the arms of China, which is detrimental to US and perhaps in the Indo-Pacific as well?
This is the kind of outcome that we have to endure and live with, because we cannot give up that a small nation, innocent nation of Ukraine is being targeted, attacked, and its citizens being killed by an authoritarian regime such as Russia. So the United States must hoist its banner of human rights, democracy, and so on, universal values, as high as possible, and Japan, Australia are willing to join forces with the United States for that matter.
Do you think, the absence of India, when we mention Indo-Pacific, and NATO has been continuously inviting these four nations, as you spoke about, is India conspicuous by its absence? Why has India not risen to the stature that NATO gives an invite, keeping in mind the Quad has already been created, where India is a major partner, and also the geographical position of India makes it vulnerable and at the same time an important actor to dissuade China from its aggressive policies and aggressive actions in the Indo-Pacific?
India may be absent, but I don't think it is conspicuously absent. India must take care of its own security by itself. India cannot make both China and Russia your enemies, its enemies. So it's got to walk a fine balance. That is being well understood by Tokyo's defense planners. Quad, you mentioned, namely India, Japan, the United States, and Australia, is about more about the future than about the present, because India is set to grow in all aspects, economy, military, pride, if you like, and Japan is ever more willing to collaborate as much as possible with such a country as ambitious as India.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Professor Taniguchi, for joining me on the telecast. Stay on for the rest of our discussion because I'm also being joined by Ray Locker. He's an author and presidential historian. He's joining me from Washington, D.C. And Ray, how do you view the first statements, and even before the summit started earlier, and I think the leaders have already arrived. The summit is going to start later on today, 2 a.m. Indian Standard Time, which is going to be about, I think, 10:30 a.m. If I'm not wrong. And talking about the first focus area has been, as per the news reports and the commentary that has come, the U.S. State Department has come out and spoken that it is going to be the push towards partnerships with Indo-Pacific.
Well, that's only logical. I mean, that's a key area, as Professor Taniguchi mentioned. We have to strengthen our alliances in that region, specifically because of China. And that's something that affects not just the United States, but all NATO nations as they try to expand their economies in a part of the world that's growing more rapidly, certainly, than Europe. Okay,
so herein lies the crux of NATO. Is it simply going to be the Indo-Pacific? And like I also spoke to Professor Taniguchi, that there have been these naval exercises that have been conducted, which includes South Korea and Japan and United States of America. It just got concluded a few weeks ago. How does this work out? Is there a new NATO that is going to be a NATO plus plus, where you have the Indo-Pacific joining hands?
Well, I think that's the goal of many policymakers in the United States and elsewhere. And this is something that's been happening for decades. I mean, naval exercises with Japan and South Korea have been going on for a long, long time. And I mean, certainly since the Korean War in 1950 to 1953. So, that trend continues. You'll see more people from different countries become involved in that. I mean, because that's a key part of the world where there's a lot of tension, and that's where a huge amount of trade happens.
How do you view, as the NATO summit that commences today, there is also going to be a parallel 11-day military operation, that is a military exercise that is going to be held between Belarus and China?
Well, that's obviously something they're going to be talking about here over the next 3 days. I mean, the idea that China needs to be involved in Belarus because there are NATO troops in Poland seems ridiculous. It seems like an obvious provocation. I mean, what interest does China really have in Belarus? Certainly economically, Belarus is a basket case, as is most of Russia. So it's a sign that they're flexing their muscles in different parts of the world, and that's the reason why the United States and NATO are doing things in the Indo-Pacific region.
There are a couple of more non-NATO European nations, key amongst them being Hungary and Slovakia, that have come into news. In fact, the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban had met the Russian President Vladimir Putin. He ended up visiting Xi Jinping as well in Beijing. How do you, and the Slovakian Prime Minister came out and said that he supported the decision of the Hungarian Prime Minister to have visited Moscow and then to Beijing. Do you think there is slowly some amount of traction that is growing within the non-NATO European countries, which may, I wouldn't say which completely favor Russia, but they're also looking at some sort of a solution or a ceasefire or some sort of a negotiation to stop this war?
Well, I don't think many people in the United States look toward Hungary for guidance on foreign policy. Viktor Orban is somebody who has become increasingly authoritarian over the last 10 years. He certainly has some adherents on the right wing of the United States political spectrum. And so people are leery of that. I mean, Hungary is an independent country, as is Slovakia. They're free to do whatever they want in terms of foreign policy. That's not something that's viewed favorably by the U.S. government or by many people in NATO.
Okay. Do you also feel that the United States of America, with its very aggressive stance in providing all military, diplomatic and strategic support to Ukraine against Russia, has then pushed Moscow further towards Beijing?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think the U.S. reaction to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign nation, is aggressive. I think it's defensive. Russia may want people to believe that it's aggressive, but it's clearly not. I mean, we would have been happy, the United States, to just have things be the way they were up until February 2022. But no, Russia made that decision to invade a sovereign nation, thinking that it was quickly going to overthrow the Zelensky government. And they made a grievous error. Now their economy is in a free fall. They're losing hundreds of thousands of people. And that's all their fault. And so they can say, oh, well, you made us do it. We didn't make anybody do anything. And that's something that aggressors from throughout history have done. Oh, Hitler said it was all because of the Danzig corridor in 1939. That's why he had to invade Poland. I mean, that's crazy. And so what Russia is doing now is the same thing.
How does, America and the NATO countries plan to fight the, totalitarian rule of China, which is now not just contained within China or South China Sea, but also spreading across other countries in Africa and South America and the Indian subcontinent. Keeping in mind, there have been a number of countries, including the United States of America, who continue to have economic and trade ties with China.
Well, the United States and China are linked forever, really. I mean, we can't afford to not have economic relationships with them. I mean, the way to counteract Chinese influence around the world is to become involved more and more around the world. We can't afford to be an isolationist country, although some people want to be that. I mean, you can't just say, well, we don't want to be there, so China then will have more influence. So you have to, do hard and soft power. You have to reach out to those countries and show why it's in their economic interest to be aligned with the Western nations than it is to be aligned with China.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ray, for your opinion. Stay on back because let me get in Ambassador Pradeep Kapoor. He is a former diplomat joining me on the telecast right now. Ambassador Kapoor, particularly the question of India. And do you think this is peculiar that when we talk about the Indo-Pacific and you don't have India?
Well, I had spoken to one of our diplomatic colleagues from the US State Department, who's currently on an assignment in the NATO headquarters as a NATO official. And he said that discussions have been going on for a long time to get India into some sort of partnership with NATO. And they have not borne fruit till now because India is not reacting to the proposal or not taking up the proposal, because the current proposal was for the NATO plus 5. There are 5 countries which are partners with NATO, which includes Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, and Israel. And they wanted to make it NATO plus 6. From my understanding of the Indian Ministry of External Affairs and Indian diplomacy, India may not be keen to enter into a partnership where it is India in NATO plus 6. If there is some sort of a arrangement where it is NATO plus India, then there might be some sort of interest or traction or response from India. But it is not that NATO has not been trying to get India into some sort of role with NATO for many decades now, but the other way around, that India is not keen on a military alliance with NATO in the first instance. Secondly, if it is interested, it is in a form of a partnership with NATO. Thirdly, if it is to be a partnership, it has to be a standalone partnership with NATO plus India, and not NATO plus 6, where India is just one of the many. So I think those are the stumbling blocks which each side needs to understand the concerns of the others and the interests of the others. And it has been very interesting for me to listen to the views of the distinguished panelists. Megha, thank you for putting up this great panel on this discussion. But the other aspect which I would also like to mention, there was mention about Russia being the aggressor and Russia economy being in free fall and lots of things about Russia. But I just want to put a question that is it really so? Is Russia the aggressor in the sense that Was it not asking for Ukraine to declare that it will not become part of NATO, or for the NATO to declare that Ukraine will not be taken into the NATO membership, or for the US to sort of say that, okay, Ukraine will not? Because if I'm viewing it from the Russian geopolitical strategy and geostrategy, the situation of Russia, if Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, and NATO has been inching closer and closer to Russian borders, and Russia, and there were many distinguished historians and officials in the US which proposed that Russia and NATO should have good collaboration and good friendship, including Henry Kissinger, whom I don't particularly admire or respect for various other reasons, but at least on this issue, he was very clear that there should be closer discussion and friendship and collaboration. That has not come about. A lot of other historians and others have written many big articles about how NATO could have been more positive towards Russia after the World War II, after NATO was created. But that has not happened. And about the Russian economy, there have been some recent reports by the IMF and the World Bank that the Russian economy seems to be doing much better than the European economies, generally speaking, in so many respects. And the European economies are buying oil, Russian oil, and US is buying Russian oil, all refined in India. So I'm not sure whether Russian economy is in any way in danger, in the sense that the sanctions which were imposed, hundreds of sanctions or thousands of sanctions, how much they have hurt Russia and how much they have hurt the dollar. Because the dollar has become, there are many articles which talk about the weakening of the dollar, how many countries are now doing trade in their own currencies because sanctions were put on the Russian ruble.
Yes.
So Russia is doing trade with China in their bilateral currencies, doing trade with India in their bilateral currencies. There are more than, the value of the dollar in terms of its international, its, respect as an international trading currency has dropped by 40% since the start of the war. So if that is the way the dollar value has depreciated, not in terms of its dollar currency terms, but in terms of its acceptability terms. If it has dropped by 40% since the start of the war, and many countries are now doing their trade in different currencies other than the dollar, where they were earlier doing it in the dollar. So I don't know if there is to be a real analysis by independent experts who can bring some sort of neutral approach or agnostic approach to the situation. Because currently what we have is the Western narrative, where we read every day that this is been entirely the fault of Russia, and Russian economy is sinking, and Russia is moving towards its doomsday scenario, etc., etc. I'm not sure, because Russia has great strategic depth. It straddles around half the globe, for example, 11 time zones. No other country spans 11 time zones as Russia does. Then it has great natural resources. Then the partnerships it has with other countries are deepening to a great extent. The Western world is pushing Russia away from itself into China's arms, which is very dangerous for the world. And India is trying to create a counterbalance so that Russia does not completely, align itself into the Chinese strategic policies and thinking. So it may be useful for the Western world also to give it sort of a very serious rethink and reflect upon it and introspect about it as to where are they heading, what are they doing, and is it the right thing?
Okay.
Thank you, Megha.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's a detailed view, and thank you very much for putting it across. Because while we have the way Ray Locker, who's put it, and there's a contrasting view of what Ambassador Kapoor has kind of described to us in a nutshell about how the situation is. But let's get in Dean Baxendale. He's a columnist. He's joining me from Ottawa. And thank you, Dean. Let's hear it from you. You part of the North American region. How do you view these two contrasting views that come in? I wonder if you are sympathetic to the NATO cause versus how the point of view of Russia and perhaps an alignment of Russia with China stands for.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, I won't get into the ambassador's revisionist perspective on the interactions between America, the West, and China and Russia. Suffices to say that India supported the Russian economy by buying Russian oil. Yes, the Russians have circumvented many sanctions, but their economy has been deeply affected by this. I work both in North America, Washington, and in the South Pacific, and we can see the aggression by China in the Solomon Islands, Sri Lanka, in terms of their influence operations, and they're looking to take freedom of navigation away down the road. But from an economic perspective, the NATO alliance and us aligning around what we might call friendshoring and bringing economies that are like-minded, share similar values together, I think this is in the best interest of all. The concept of isolating China is clearly not, to the end. We want peace. We want to work together. But we're not going to allow Russia and China to be the aggressors. India knows China's aggression in Kashmir and in the north. You've had your skirmish. There was a battle there where a number of Indian soldiers were killed on both sides. And it's clear that Modi, who was there embracing Vladimir Putin in Russia, in Moscow yesterday, is sending another sign that yes, we want, we appreciate our partnership with Russia. But bottom line is India has to make its own stand and yes, defend itself. But I would suggest that the alliance between China and Russia was happening a long, long time ago before this incident in 2022 took place by Russia. We're looking at Russia and China hyper nationalism and moving into last century's empires. So this is the aggression that NATO is fighting. Canada has to pull up its socks and spend more on our defense spending, which the Prime Minister is outlining a plan today in NATO to leaders behind the scenes.
Okay. Then also, when NATO says that we are going to be focused primarily on building greater partnerships with the Indo-Pacific nations, and the amount of time, energy, funds, military equipment, arms and ammunition support that has been given to Ukraine is huge as compared to the trickle that comes perhaps in the South China Sea. Of course, there have been vessels and submarines that are, and the warships that of the Americans and the British that are parked in the South China Sea, and also the kind of support that is being showcased to Taiwan and Japan. But it's a trickle of what goes out in the massive show of support to Ukraine against the war against China. So how do you view in the future things are going to play out? Because we recently saw there is, I think, a defense pact that has been signed between Philippines and United States of America. There is condemnation that has come from the Chinese side as well. So you think there is going to be more concentration of funds and military support that is going to be showcased by America in the Indo-Pacific here on?
I certainly think that America, and its allies are going to try to show as much restraint as they possibly can with respect to direct confrontation in the South China Seas with China for obvious reasons. But I do think that increased spending on military aid and more collaboration in the Indo-Pacific is certainly taking place, as the professor pointed out earlier, and will continue in that vein. I think what we need to show is that the West is not afraid to defend itself, to stand with allies, and that that we are going to support democracies and freedom over tyranny. So I think that's the message that both Moscow and China need to understand clearly. And I think that NATO nations and those in the Indo-Pacific region are of like-minded thinking. Okay. And I think India is carefully negotiating and navigating its position and looking at its partnerships seriously going forward.
But you also feel that up until the time, the problem is not actually being confronted by America or by the West, like what is happening in Ukraine and Russia. It does not really bother to see beyond what is very apparent in front of him. Because Ukraine impacts the West so much, and more particularly Europe. It is just strings that are being pulled by the United States of America, because it is a fight that has gone on since the Cold War that happened between Russia and US, and that's been well documented and is well known across the globe. But when it comes to Indo-Pacific, the focus is not as much. Maybe it's just only recently brought the attention of United States of America because of China, because up until now the issues in the Indo-Pacific or the global South were not something that America or the European countries really catered to.
I don't agree completely with that statement. I think that the aggression that China has shown over the past decade has been countered by such measures as setting up the Quad and other alliances, and a higher level of cooperation between Japan and other Indo-Pacific nations to defend themselves. So I think this trend will continue, and I don't think it's just a reaction of America. I think it's a reaction of the free world, if we want to use that Cold War term, and democracy seeing that there are aggressors on the borders. And we need to defend ourselves. And so I think that this strategy will continue. America will continue, and its NATO allies, because India, for instance, is a very important ally. And if India wants to have a success in the future as a global juggernaut, trading and manufacturing hub for the world, I think it's in its best interest to work more closely with Western nations and European nations.
Okay, all right. Let's get back, Professor Taniguchi, and how do you view, Professor Taniguchi, as the conversation that has gone on in the number of people, the panelists who have spoken about it?
Right. Firstly, the United States has been a residential power from the Indian Ocean, actually from the Middle East, Indian Ocean, through to the Pacific. Commitment and engagement of the country in this region is nothing new, with or without rise of China. So that's number one. And Tokyo is not actually interested in bringing India into any alliance network, being aware that India is very much independently minded. If I may reiterate what I have already said, the policy that Tokyo has extended to India is all about buying into India's huge potential, growth potential, and its mindset of staying independent from authoritarian regime, being proud of its own democracy. So that's what Tokyo is seeking about its relationship with India. And NATO needs other partners as much as Japan needs NATO. And I think it's all the more important for Pacific Alliance and Atlantic Alliance to come together to show to the world that when it comes to safeguarding some of the international common public goods, it should be done by those like-minded democratic nations. And so that's what's going to happen soon in Washington, D.C.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much to all my panelists for joining me and sharing the views on this subject. Of course, our eyes are going to be glued to Washington, D.C. and what comes out of that 75th anniversary of NATO that is being celebrated, commemorated, and the much awaited talking points, whether it is about Ukraine and Russia or we talk about the Indo-Pacific, the kind of impetus that has never before been seen, that has been brought forth onto the discussion table by Washington, D.C. On that note, I slip into a short break. Thanks for watching.